Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a video on Hellboy reading recommendations. So, unlike my Conan video where I recommended specific runs and specific issues, this is actually just going to be me recommending most of Hellboy and its many spin-offs, but telling you the easiest way to get those and the kind of the reading order and what's connected to what. So I am going to recommend getting them in trade paperback, and I'll explain why as we go along. But I recommend trade paperback, and you can either do that in print or you can do that on Comixology. Comixology Unlimited, which is only like $5 a month, has everything of Hellboy I'm about to talk about, like all the main series, plus I believe it's the entire first series of BPRD, which I'm about to talk about, plus some of the spin-offs too, I think. And that's just $5 a month, and you can read all that. So that's a really, really good option if you want to do that. So some ground rules here. So when I refer to a name of a plot line, that's the name of a miniseries or trade paperback. When I refer to a number, a volume number, that is referring to trade paperbacks. Now, that's not necessarily the best way to get all this stuff. Hellboy is still in print in trade paperback. BPRD, most of this stuff is not. BPRD and BPRD Hell on Earth are probably best gotten in omnibus, since those are still in print and are cheaper than you can get the trades for right now. But you can still tell which trades are collected in the omnibus. They're in the descriptions of each omnibus, what they collect. So let's start with Hellboy. So Hellboy is a really amazing body of work by Mike Mignola, stretching back 20-some years. And it is a great series. The premise is essentially towards the end of World War II, Rasputin and some Nazis try to summon the beast of the apocalypse. And they don't get it, and instead what shows up on Earth is a little baby demon, and it ends up with the Allies who raise him to be a good guy, and he becomes a paranormal investigator, and he fights ghosts and monsters and all these things from myths and legends and folklore. So there are two types of Hellboy stories. One is short stories, and these are one-shots and short stories that are set in the past. You'll know them because you'll open up the story and it'll be set in 1980 or 1950s or something like that. So those are self-contained. Those sometimes they will set up something they'll be referred to again, but mainly they're just self-contained. Anyone can just jump on and enjoy that story without having to know anything about the concept. Then there are the present day stories that are an ongoing storyline, similar to the mythology episodes in X-Files. So, you have your self-contained Monster of the Week stuff, then you have your mythology stuff. And that's typically done in mini-series, and, you'll know that because it'll be set in the present day. They're both good works. And even the mythology stuff, the stuff that's ongoing, does flashbacks and recaps. So all of it's very friendly to new readers. Mike Mignola wants you to come in at any point and enjoy Hellboy. However, I recommend starting from the beginning. Go get the first trade and work your way up. The reason I do that is because while you can get all these comics that say Hellboy on the cover, there's a lot of short stories, and they're going to appear in every which way imaginable. They're going to be in all kinds of places you've never even heard of, and it's almost physically impossible to track down every single short story. But if you get the trades, they're all in there. So it'll make your life easier. You'll find lots of wonderful stuff you weren't able to read otherwise. And plus, the trades for those miniseries I was talking about has epilogues on them that are only in the trades. So you need to get the trades to get the whole story, because some of those epilogues are actually really important. So the trades are definitely the way to go. Plus, I got all this stuff as it was released. If I got it right now, this would cost me a whole lot of money. This is, some pretty pricey stuff now, 20 some years later. Now, the series begins with Hellboy as part of an organization called the BPRD, the Bureau of Paranormal Defense and Research. So there's going to come a point at which he's going to leave BPRD. That's going to happen after a miniseries called The Conqueror Worm. I always get that wrong. Conqueror Worm. He'll leave BPRD and go on a walkabout. And so BPRD will continue in its own series of miniseries. So you can try to read those parallel to the Hellboy miniseries. There's a lot more BPRD, and BPRD becomes a monthly comic eventually. Hellboy is kind of just few and far between whenever Mignola can get around to it. But I don't believe you need to follow BPRD to follow Hellboy. That's how I read it, but looking back on it, I think you're perfectly okay if you just want to read Hellboy and keep it in mind and then go back and read other spin-offs. I think you're going to be good because Hellboy is very self-contained. However, there are some instances where Hellboy does tie into all the others. So this is Hellboy the Island. I highly recommend, even if you don't get anything else, get this if you're interested in any of the spin-offs. This will give you the history and explain how everything ties together. You will understand everything going on in the Hellboy Mignola universe a whole lot better after reading this. Hellboy runs into trade paperbacks for 12 volumes. And then there is Hellboy in Hell, which is 2 volumes. And this is the final part of that ongoing modern story of Hellboy. And so I have everything up until the first volume of Hellboy in Hell. I don't have the final completing volume of that series. I will be getting it very, very soon. There's also Hellboy in Mexico trade paperback, which is separate from both Hellboy in Hell and the other 12 volumes. And that's worth getting, and I'll mention, where that ties in a minute. But for Hellboy in Hell, there is a reference to this gentleman. This is Sir Edward Grey, the Witch Hunter. If you want to read his spin-off, it is a worthy read. You don't necessarily need it, but I think it will enhance your reading enjoyment of Hellboy in Hell. The first miniseries is called In the Service of Angels, and it's really good. There are actually 5 volumes of Witchfinder. The second volume I didn't really like. The second miniseries was just like, and it didn't really tie into anything as far as I could tell. So I don't know if the others after that tie into anything, or if they're skippable, or if they're good or not. I will be trying them out at some point, but I can vouch. First volume was great on Witchfinder, second volume, and so what I was going to mention is that for the second volume of Hellboy in Hell, I highly recommend reading Hellboy in Mexico first. And this is just the one-shot Hellboy in Mexico. You need to get the trade because it ties into a short story in the trade paperback. Mignola originally did this, and then he did a graphic novel and several short stories to follow up. And one of them is referred to in the final issue of Hellboy in Hell. I don't know, having not read it, I don't know how vital it is to understand that issue. It probably isn't vital, but it'll give you more context. And Hellboy in Mexico is really good and should be gotten. So let's talk about the biggest Hellboy spinoff, BPRD. So BPRD essentially became a monthly series to kind of fill in that gap because Hellboy was coming out so infrequently. And so it's very long. So there are 14 trade paperbacks for the original BPRD series. That's 14 volumes, followed by a second series called BPRD Hell on Earth. Hell on Earth is 15 volumes. That's 15 trade paperbacks. And the final series for BPRD is called The Devil You Know. And that is, I believe, 3 trade paperbacks. So it's a very long work. Not all of it is going to probably appeal to you. I mean, it's just that long. Inevitably, there's probably going to be parts that feel like they drag. There certainly were for me. But I will say that if you stick with it, anytime you hit that miniseries you don't like, believe me, you're going to be rewarded the next miniseries or 2 miniseries down the road. It's a great, great body of work. I would describe it as probably one of the most unique, epic, and ambitious series ever to be put out in a comic book. It starts out following up the plot lines in Hellboy. You know, you get the origin of Ape Sapien and things like that. But it escalates. You have a war with frog-like creatures that are trying to take over the earth and replace humans. But it just keeps going up. They keep escalating things until the world essentially is ending. I mean, you're talking about full apocalypse. They unleash a ton of Lovecraftian monsters on the earth with no way to stop them. It is amazing. You've never seen anything on this scale done in this amount of detail. You know, it's just, you know, these guys fighting the apocalypse every issue when you get to like deep into Hell on Earth. So it's really cool, and there's just, you know, there's certain stories you can't do without a very long backstory setting things up, and it's just rewarding to see that. I am personally on volume 11, I believe, of Hell on Earth, so I'm pretty close to the ending. Now, as far as some of the low points that might be skippable, I mean, War on Frogs felt like a filler to me and didn't really, wasn't that good to me. I don't know about volume 14 of Hell on Earth, whether it's good or not, but I've heard that's a filler. Haven't gotten there yet, but that could be something you could skip if you're trying to save a little bit of money, because you know, you might spend a lot of money if you're trying to get all this, especially in print. So there's also these mini-series which are set in the past. There's BPRD 1946, 1947, 1948, and BPRD Vampire. And these are all set in the past. I would say they're skippable. I didn't really care for BPRD 1946 and 1947, so I didn't get the others. However, there is a major appearance of a character who becomes a big player later in BPRD. So I would say 1946 is probably worth getting just to get, you know, the first appearance and the backstory for this particular character who plays a major role as you get to Hell on Earth and The Devil You Know. So BPRD is very tied into the other series. So when you get to BPRD The Killing Ground, right there, you're going to want to have read or be reading Lobster Johnson. This is the first volume of Lobster Johnson that ties into that storyline. And it's just going to make a lot more sense if you read this. So this is Lobster Johnson, The Iron Prometheus, the first Lobster Johnson miniseries. It's very good. I love it as a comic book by itself. I have not read the other Lobster Johnson miniseries. I just had a hard time keeping up with all the spin-offs, and I'm like, what? How many are there? There's actually 6 Lobster Johnson trade paperbacks. So I can't vouch if they're good. I hope they are. This one's good. And I can't vouch if they tie in, you know, directly into BPRD or any of the others that much. They could be self-contained. They could be, you know, something you need to get other references. I don't know. So another spin-off that got miniseries and one-shots in parallel to Hellboy and BPRD was Ape Sapien. And I remember that I intended to enjoy those. So I think the first 2 volumes of Ape Sapien that collect those are good. Where it really ties into BPRD is this story, Ape Sapien, the Abysmal Plane. And it's a really cool story all by itself, but there is a major reference to it, a major callback in Hell on Earth. So just read this before you get to Hell on Earth. You'll be glad you did. So things are going to happen to Ape Sapien in the modern day BPRD series. And when you get to BPRD Hell on Earth, A Cold Day in Hell, is when he spins off into an ongoing series. I didn't really care for this one. This is Ape Sapien kind of wandering around the post-apocalyptic world that they're fighting in, but it deals mostly with humans and stuff, and it's just not that interesting to me. This is collected in Volume 3 of Ape Sapien and owned, so Volume 3 and 4 and all that. We'll collect the ongoing series. Like I said, I can't really recommend it, but it might tie in a major way in the end in the stuff that I don't have. But just keep in mind, I guess, that it exists. Another spinoff is Sledgehammer 44, and this is basically a suit that can channel a mystical energy, and there are some references to BPRD to it, but I feel like the ones that I have, again, I'm only up to the 11th trade paperback of Hell on Earth. The ones that I have so far basically just say he exists and almost are just a tease to the miniseries that he had. So I don't feel like this is vital to understand anything, but it is a good trade paperback and well worth getting. So there are a couple instances late in the series that you will want to have read Hellboy before you read BPRD. One of them is Return of the Master, which takes place directly after Hellboy the Fury. And the other is A Cold Place in Hell, directly ties into the first volume of Hellboy in Hell, as do some scenes in Ape Sapien, the ongoing series that was happening at the time. So there are some instances where you will want to have read Hellboy before you read those. And so because I am a few years behind on reading both Hellboy and BPRD, there have been some spin-offs that have come out in the last few years that I can't really talk about because I don't know a lot about them. I'm going to link in the description below to a reading list that will tell you where they fit in and where, if you want to try to read BPRD and Hellboy, at the same time where, various different trade paperbacks would fit in with each other. One spinoff that has happened in the last few years is Hellboy and the BPRD, and that looks pretty promising. There's Hellboy and the BPRD 1952, and the subsequent miniseries are 1953, 1954, 1955, and 1956. So that might be something to check out. If you have Comixology Unlimited, you can read 1952 and see if you like it or not. I plan to do that. Looks promising. And one Mignola comic that I wanted to point out, it's not technically a Hellboy comic, but it does make fun of the stuff that he does in BPRD and Hellboy. This is really great. This is a wonderful, wonderful, funny comic by Mignola, and there's an animated adaption of it. It's called The Amazing Screw-On Head. So it's truly crazy. I wish there was more than just one issue of it, but if you get a chance, read it. You'll appreciate it. And so even though the ongoing modern story of Hellboy has come to an end, and BPRD is coming to an end or has come to an end depending on when that last issue drops, Hellboy still continues. There's still one-shots being published of it, and they look good. There's like a Hellboy versus Lobster Johnson that looks awesome. So If you want to pick those up, again, you know, Hellboy is really easy to pick up. You know, you can just grab any issue of it and, you know, enjoy it. But, you know, if you're trying to get everything, and I recommend doing that, you might want to wait for the trades so you can get, you know, all the little nooks and crannies that might be published, you know, the short story in some place you've never heard of. So anyway, those are my recommendations. I hope this helped, because I know, I mean, this has been intimidating for me trying to figure out where everything fits in the last few years when I tried to switch over to trades. It was a little easier while it was coming out, because then I knew, like, oh, this came out this month along with this one. But, you know, when you're in trade paperback land, it can be a challenge. So I hope this helps someone. Again, I'll link to a very detailed reading order list in the description below. God bless everyone who works on those. You're heroes in my book. But anyway, I just recommend, you know, Hellboy and the whole universe that he launched. It's a really, really wonderful body of work, and I hope more people pick it up, you know, as time goes on. So anyway, like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, see ya.